All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the Greek world, building a study guide designed for some serious AP level analysis. We're going to go way beyond just what happened and really dig into the why it mattered then, and why it still shapes our world today. So here's our game plan. We'll start with how the land itself created the Greeks. Then we'll put the two heavyweights, Sparta and Athens, head to head. After that, we'll look at Athens' incredible golden age and how it all came crashing down. Then, we jump to Alexander the Great and his wild new global culture, and finally, we'll unpack the Greek legacy that's still with us.
First up, from geography to polis. You really can't understand the Greeks without understanding their home. The Mediterranean environment didn't just influence their civilization. It literally forged their unique political DNA right from the get-go.
And that brings us to this central question. For the Greeks, society wasn't just something they built on top of the land. It was a direct response to the land. Their politics, their economy, their entire way of life, it was all dictated by the mountains and the sea around them. Okay, check this out. It's like a perfect cause and effect chain. You've got all these rugged mountains and islands, right? Well, that makes a big unified empire basically impossible. So what do you get instead? Hundreds of fiercely independent city-states, the polis. Since you're never far from the water, you become expert sailors focused on trade. Not much good farmland? No problem, you just sail out and colonize new places for resources. And get this, even the weather played a part. A nice, moderate climate meant more outdoor life, which meant more public gatherings in the agora, which led directly to people debating and voting, the very beginning of democracy. It's all connected. Now, before the classical Greece we all think of, there were these foundational cultures, the Minoans and Mycenaeans. For your AP essays, the Trojan War is a key turning point. Yeah, it's a myth, but it was likely a real conflict over a vital trade route, the Dardanelles, and that highlights the economic pressures of the day. The aftermath is a perfect example of historical cause and effect. The war fatally weakened the Mycenaeans, leaving them wide open to invasion from the Dorians. This kicked off a dark age that basically hit the reset button, clearing the way for the classical city-states to rise from the ashes. All right, so the polis is now the main political unit in Greece, and right away, two rival models, two totally different answers to the question, how should we live, emerge? Of course, I'm talking about Sparta and Athens. And this chart just lays out the rivalry perfectly. Look at the contrast. Sparta is a military state, an oligarchy that values the group above everything. Athens is this wild experiment in direct democracy that champions the individual. And get this, Spartan women could own land and were expected to be physically tough, while Athenian women were completely confined to the household. This isn't just a list of differences, it's a clash of entire worldviews. So, what exactly is an oligarchy? It's rule by a few. And for Sparta, this system wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. See, they had a massive enslaved population, the Helots, who outnumbered them by something like 10 to 1. So, an iron-fisted rule by a small, powerful group was the only way they could maintain control and keep their military machine ready at all times. The power had to be concentrated. Okay, on the flip side, you have Athenian democracy. Revolutionary, for sure, but, and this is a critical point for any AP analysis, you have to remember how exclusive it was. To be a citizen, you had to be male, free, own land, and have been born in Athens. That means the vast majority of people, women, slaves, foreigners, had zero say. So yeah, Athenian democracy was a radical idea, but it was for a very, very small club. Let's turn to Athens at its absolute zenith under the great statesman Pericles. We're talking about a golden age of art, philosophy, and power. But just like in a Greek tragedy, this story of incredible success had the seeds of its own destruction planted right from the start. Under Pericles, Athens was the undisputed center of the world. He used money from an alliance called the Delian League to fund these enormous building projects, like the Parthenon. This wasn't just about making the city beautiful, it created jobs and projected Athenian power everywhere. He even made democracy stronger by paying people for public service, so poorer citizens could participate. But here's the catch. He was using other cities' money to glorify Athens, and that did not go over well. And all that resentment finally boiled over into the Peloponnesian War. The real cause, as the historian Thucydides wrote, was Sparta's growing fear of Athenian power. The war was an absolute disaster. A plague wiped out a huge chunk of Athens' population. And then, in a crazy twist of irony, Sparta, the defenders of Greek freedom against Persia, allied with Persia to crush the Athenian navy.
Sparta technically won, but after nearly 30 years of brutal civil war, the entire Greek world was exhausted, broke, and a perfect target for invasion. A weakened Greece, a power vacuum. Someone is always waiting in the wings. And in this case, it was a rising power to the north, Macedonia. The battered city-states were in no shape to resist, letting Philip II and his son, Alexander, sweep in, conquer Greece, and then turn their sights on the rest of the known world. Just take a second to look at that number. 2 million square miles. Alexander the Great carved out an empire stretching across 3 continents, and he did it all before his death at the age of 32. It's just staggering. This wasn't just a conquest. It was the creation of a brand new, interconnected world. Now, if there is one term you absolutely have to nail from this era, it is Hellenistic. This is so key. See, Alexander didn't just want to conquer people. He was a cultural architect. He actively encouraged the blending of cultures across his massive empire. So Hellenistic culture is this amazing mashup of Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and even Indian ideas. It created a vibrant, cosmopolitan world that was connected like never before. So Alexander dies young, and his empire shatters into pieces, ruled by his generals. But the culture he kicked off, it just kept going, taking on a life of its own. The new center of gravity wasn't Athens anymore. The new hotspot, the real center of the world, was a city like Alexandria in Egypt. It was a global hub of trade, science, and learning, home to the legendary library. A common form of Greek called koine became the language of business and scholarship, and art got more emotional and realistic, reflecting this diverse new world. All right, let's bring it all home. Why are we still talking about these guys thousands of years later? Well, because their ideas, their innovations, they are literally baked into the foundations of so much of our world. And so much of it starts with this guy, Socrates. The thing is, he never wrote a single word down. His entire contribution was a method, a way of thinking. He just walked around Athens, asking people questions, forcing them to examine their own beliefs. This Socratic method is one of the pillars of Western thought. Next up is his student, Plato. He took Socrates' big ideas and tried to build an entire philosophical system. In his most famous book, The Republic, he actually argued against the democracy Athens was so proud of, suggesting it would be better to be ruled by a wise philosopher king. He also gave us the theory of forms, this mind-bending idea that our world is just an imperfect shadow of a true, perfect reality. And then comes Aristotle, who studied under Plato and then basically said, okay, that's interesting, but let's focus on the world we can actually see and touch. He created the rules for logic. He developed an early scientific method based on observation. His ideas were so influential that for almost 2,000 years, if you wanted to study science or philosophy, you started with Aristotle. And of course, it goes way beyond philosophy. I mean, the building downtown with the big columns, that's Greek architecture. They invented theater, tragedy, and comedy as we know it. Their classical art set the standard for beauty for centuries. And in math and science, guys like Pythagoras, Euclid, and Archimedes laid the groundwork for entire fields of study. This was the cultural toolkit that Rome would later inherit and spread all over the world. So that leaves us with a really big, complex question. For an AP-level analysis, this is what it's all about. We've obviously inherited their democracy, their philosophy, their science, but what do we do with the fact that their society was built on slavery, and that their democracy excluded almost everyone? How do we reckon with this brilliant, powerful, and deeply flawed inheritance? Wrestling with that contradiction? Well, that's the real work of a historian.